Everyone said our wedding looked like a scene out of a dream. I didn't tell them it turned into a nightmare before sunrise. They say you can see everything in a woman's eyes on her wedding day: fear, joy, hope, love. I saw all of that in Vanessa's eyes, too. But now I realize none of it was for me. I still remember the way her dress shimmered like frost under the hanging garden lights, how her fingers laced into mine so perfectly it felt like destiny. And when she leaned in to kiss me for the cameras, everyone clapped like they were watching a fairy tale come true. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was the opening act of a con. We didn't fly to some remote island for a honeymoon. She said she wanted something real, a weekend in a small coastal house near Seattle, just us, no distractions. I thought it was romantic. In hindsight, it was just strategic isolation. That first night, we lit the fireplace, opened wine, unwrapped expensive gifts from people we didn't care about. She kissed me, slow and long, like she had something to prove. We made love like newlyweds should. Or so I thought. Around 2 a.m., I woke up and reached for her. She was gone. I didn't panic. I figured she went to get water. Maybe stepped out to take a call. Her company was still in a delicate state, after all. 10 minutes passed. Then 30. Then an hour. Her phone wasn't on the nightstand. Her wedding ring was still warm. At 4:23 a.m., the door creaked open. She walked in barefoot, hair messy, lips parted. She looked flushed, like she'd been running. Or not running. She saw me awake, smiled like nothing had happened, slipped under the covers, and whispered, "I couldn't sleep. I needed some air." She curled into me like a secret. And I held her like a fool. But something had shifted. Her skin didn't feel like mine anymore. That was the moment I knew, something was deeply, dangerously wrong. And I wasn't going to let her find out I knew. Not yet. I always thought the worst kind of betrayal came from enemies. But I was wrong. The real devastation comes from the people who hold your hand while they're sharpening the knife. Vanessa Wolf wasn't just the woman I married, she was the woman who made me believe I belonged in a world that had always felt allergic to people like me. And that made what she did, unforgivable. But let me start where all foolish love stories start, with the illusion of magic. I grew up in a 2-bedroom rental in a part of Detroit where police sirens were the lullaby. My mother worked 2 jobs. My father left before I could form a memory of his face. Everything I've built, my software, my company, my calm, I had to pull from the dirt like stubborn weeds through concrete. I don't trust them easily. But when I do, I go all in. And I did with Vanessa. She walked into my life like she was already meant to own it. We met at a tech symposium. I was speaking about ethical machine learning, she was on the panel, Wolf Dynamics Golden Heir, CEO before 30, the kind of woman who didn't have to try to be noticed. She saw me. Asked sharp questions. Smiled like she wasn't supposed to. 3 months later, we were inseparable. She said she admired how grounded I was. How I didn't flinch around people with money. She once told me I had an honest face. I think about that often now, especially when I remember how she used it against me. Vanessa had that rare combination of intelligence and magnetism that made people desperate to orbit her. But beneath the smiles, she was born and bred for war. Her mother built Wolf Dynamics with blood and claws, and when she passed, Vanessa inherited not just the crown, but the wolves it came with. She didn't just need a husband. She needed a shield. Enter me. I didn't know that then. I thought she fell for me. I thought she chose me because of who I was, not what I could offer. But Vanessa doesn't fall. She calculates. Every word she ever whispered, every touch, every kiss on the rooftop terrace while champagne sparkled between our fingers, it was all part of the script she had written before she ever said yes. And then there was him. Elliot Crane. Her head of security. The kind of man you'd expect to see in an action film, broad shoulders, shaved head, arms always crossed like he was waiting for someone to fuck up. I never liked him. He didn't talk much. Always seemed to be around, watching me like I was the one who didn't belong. I assumed it was a territorial thing, protective of his boss. I didn't know he was also protecting something else, their secret. They had a history, those two. I learned that much later. Back when she was still trying to escape her mother's shadow and he was still in the military. They had unfinished business. And I guess I was the perfect placeholder until they figured it out. Looking back, the signs were there. The way she always flinched when I complimented Elliot in front of others. The way she'd disappear on late nights, claiming board meetings. The way Elliot always spoke about me like I was a temporary glitch in the system. But love blinds you just enough to ignore what you're not ready to see. Still, I was proud of who I became with her. I learned to navigate boardrooms. I wore suits I never thought I'd afford. I started imagining children with sharp eyes and smarter minds. I even changed my company's name to integrate with Wolf Dynamics, quietly filed clauses into our merger that would benefit both of us. I thought we were building a life together. But Vanessa was building a trap. And Elliot? He was the hammer waiting to fall. And when it finally did, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't even ask, why? Because I already knew. And that's when I realized, love doesn't just die when it's betrayed. It evolves. It becomes something sharper, something colder. Something useful. Something like revenge. I remember the first time Vanessa laughed at something I said. Not the kind of polite laugh people offer during networking events or awkward dates, but a real, unfiltered laugh, the kind that makes a person forget who they're trying to be and just be. It happened during a tech panel Q&A. I'd made a joke about AI replacing dating apps by creating partners who never cheat or forget anniversaries. Everyone chuckled. She howled. She was magnetic. Dressed in a fitted navy blazer, silver cufflinks at her wrists, and a glint of challenge in her eyes, she walked right up to me after the event and said, "I don't usually laugh at nerd jokes, but you make them sound charming." Vanessa Wolf. Daughter of Diane Wolf, the legendary founder of Wolf Dynamics. I knew exactly who she was before she said her name. Everyone in the industry did. She had a reputation, brilliant, aggressive, untouchable. And there she was, touching my arm, asking if I'd like to grab coffee. I should have known then. People like her don't ask people like me for coffee unless there's something in it for them. But I didn't care. Maybe it was because I'd spent most of my 20s buried in server rooms and second-hand codebooks, trying to prove to the world that I could build something from nothing. Or maybe it was because, for once, someone saw me, not just my software. She listened to me talk about machine learning like it was music. She made me feel like I mattered beyond the algorithms and quarterly reports. Vanessa made me feel chosen. Our relationship moved fast, her pace, not mine. Within weeks, we were inseparable. Fancy dinners where she introduced me to CEOs like we were already married. Quiet nights in my apartment where she curled into me like a girl who wanted to forget how much power she had. She told me I made her feel normal. Safe. But I noticed things too. Like the way she always took phone calls in another room. Or how she never mentioned her father, even though she still wore the Wolf name like a badge of honor. Or how she once scoffed at a street vendor selling knockoff tech gadgets and whispered, "People like that always try to copy what they'll never afford." That line stayed with me. Because people like me used to be people like that. Still, I chalked it up to the pressure of her world. She lived in a space where perfection wasn't praised, it was expected. And I just wanted to be her escape from that. Her peace. We worked so well, too, intellectually, professionally. She asked me questions no one else dared. She challenged my software patents like she was vetting me for a Nobel. At some point, the conversations blurred into pillow talk and then into proposal. She didn't say yes right away. She told me she'd have to speak to the wolf board about it. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. But she said yes eventually. After reviewing our prenup, which she insisted was standard. I nodded, knowing I'd added a clause she likely wouldn't read carefully. It wasn't about screwing her over. It was about protection. Mine. By the time we got engaged, I had merged part of my company with hers, publicly a show of unity, privately a risk I wasn't even sure how to calculate. But she made me believe we were building something bigger than empires. We took engagement photos on a rooftop in Santorini. She wore white even then, like she already knew how to manipulate a narrative. I wore navy to match her eyes. Or maybe to remind myself I was swimming too deep. Everyone called us a tech power couple. But behind closed doors, I noticed the distance creeping in. Not in grand gestures, but in small things, missed dinners, unreturned messages, a glance that lingered a second too long on the man she hired as her private security. Elliot Crane. A man whose eyes never left her when she walked into a room. I once asked her if there was anything between them. She laughed, loud, too loud. And kissed me like I'd just said something absurd. He works for me, she said. And he's ex-military. He's not exactly my type. I let it go. Because when you love someone, you don't want to imagine they're capable of orchestrating your heartbreak. You don't want to believe you're being used. You want to believe you're the exception, not the fool. So I kept believing. Even when her kisses started tasting like obligation. Even when her company meetings conveniently always conflicted with ours. Even when her eyes started scanning the room like she was calculating escape routes. I held on. Because I thought love meant holding on. But I was wrong. Sometimes, love is recognizing when you're holding a blade to your own throat, and letting go before it cuts too deep. They say the wedding night is unforgettable. For me, it became a night carved in acid. The sweet smelled of roses, vanilla, and champagne. Vanessa had insisted on the same fragrance we'd worn the night we got engaged. She said it symbolized continuity. Now, the scent makes my stomach turn. The ceremony had ended in fireworks and flashbulbs, guests clinking glasses and toasting to what they called the perfect merger, romantic and corporate. I played the smiling husband. I meant it, then. We entered our penthouse suite to laughter, kisses, and the slow peeling of expensive clothes. She was perfect. Almost too perfect, an actress who knew every emotional note to hit. Still, I believed her. Or at least, I wanted to. Afterward, she said she was going to freshen up and left the bed in a satin robe that shimmered like guilt. I watched the door shut and heard her heels click down the hall, fading like a heartbeat slowing into silence. I waited. 30 minutes. An hour. At first, I thought she was planning a surprise. Maybe a private rooftop moment or some sentimental gesture. Vanessa loved dramatics. But it was nearing 2 a.m., and the surprise never came. I checked my phone. No messages. I called. Straight to voicemail. An itch began crawling behind my ribs. Not panic, certainty. Vanessa returned at 4:23 a.m. Barefoot. Hair windblown. Makeup smudged. She looked like a woman who'd just run through a summer storm, but it hadn't rained that night. "Hey," she whispered, her voice scratchy with false softness. "You're still awake?" I nodded slowly. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. She kissed me with lips that trembled slightly, and slipped beneath the covers like a ghost crawling back into its grave. She fell asleep in seconds. I stared at the ceiling until the light turned blue. I didn't confront her. Not that night. Not the morning after. Because if I was right, and I was, this wasn't just infidelity. It was calculated. Strategic. She had married me with her eyes on my intellectual property, on the shares she'd gain access to, and on the legacy she hoped to absorb like oxygen from a man she didn't love. A man she thought was too blind to see the obvious. What she didn't realize was that I had never been blind. I had just chosen to trust. The difference is important. 2 days later, I installed a keylogger and undetectable tracking software on her personal tablet. I already had access to her business laptop. We'd set up our joint security systems a month before the wedding. She wanted me to feel like I was part of her world. That was her mistake. I knew she wouldn't use her work email for anything reckless, but the tablet? That was her shadow world. Texts. DMs, hidden folders. Within 72 hours, I had everything. Photos. Messages. Voice notes. One in particular still plays on loop in the back of my mind. Leon's brilliant, but he's like a Labrador. Loyal. Sweet. You tell him to sit and he'll stay there for life. Vanessa's voice. Soft. Laughing. 6 months. That's all I need. Then I'll file. By then, everything will be under my name, co-owned, at least. And with your contract locked in at Wolf, we'll be unstoppable. She was talking to Elliot. Of course. Security chief. Lover. Co-conspirator. I had welcomed him into our home. I had shaken his hand the morning of the wedding. He had watched me put the ring on her finger with a smirk behind his eyes. What I felt in those moments wasn't rage. Not even grief. It was clear. Like I had finally woken up inside my own life. They were planning to take my name, my work, my trust, and wear them like trophies, discarding me once I'd served my function. But they didn't read the full contract. Vanessa had skimmed it. She had trusted her lawyers. But I had buried a clause deep inside the boilerplate. All intellectual property created, developed, or integrated by either party during the marriage shall become joint marital property, irrevocably binding upon certification. It sounded innocuous, standard even. But it meant that the day we married, every line of code I'd ever written, every patent I'd registered, and every AI protocol integrated into Wolf Dynamics became ours. Not hers. Not Wolf's. Ours. And since she was committing adultery, I had legal grounds to challenge the marital agreement, while retaining full control of the assets she had intended to steal. It was, in essence, a checkmate. The best kind. Silent. Legal. Final. The day after I uncovered the messages, Vanessa asked if I wanted to take a weekend trip. Somewhere snowy, she said, brushing my collar with those skilled fingers. You've been so quiet lately. I'm just tired, I replied. Of pretending. Of playing the fool. Of watching someone I loved become a stranger in my own home. I smiled. The kind of smile you offer to a chess opponent right before you castle into an attack position. Snow sounds good, I told her. But inside, I was already planning the storm. I didn't break. I didn't scream, or throw things, or accuse her with trembling hands. That would have been too merciful, too easy to write off as jealousy or insecurity. No, I did what people like Vanessa never expect from people like me. I watched. And I waited. The night I confirmed what I already knew, I stood alone in the shower for almost an hour. The hot water couldn't wash it off, the image of her lips on his neck, her laugh folded into the crook of his shoulder. I'd seen it all in grainy, time-stamped footage, each frame a dagger made of digital truth. It wasn't even just the betrayal. It was the planning. The timing. The ease. She had walked down the aisle already carrying a secret lover in her heart and a strategy in her back pocket. And she had the nerve to smile at me as if I were the love of her life. I wasn't. I was the leverage of her life. But here's the thing about being used, you either crumble, or you sharpen. I chose the latter. I withdrew from her slowly, methodically. She noticed, of course. Asked if something was wrong. I kissed her forehead. Told her I was tired. That the merger was stressful. That I needed a little space to think. She bought every word. Because people like Vanessa always assume the quiet ones don't see the storm, they forget we are the storm, just waiting for the right season. At work, I buried myself in code. At home, I watched her, how she covered her tracks, how she locked her phone the second I entered the room, how she started sleeping in silk nightgowns again, just like she did when she was first trying to impress me. But that wasn't for me anymore. It was for guilt. Guilt makes people dress prettier, talk sweeter, lie softer. Some nights, I'd lie awake beside her and wonder how long it had been. Did they laugh about me when I left the room? Did they plan this over candlelight? The worst part? There were moments I still wanted her. I hated myself for that. That's when I realized, I couldn't just walk away. Not quietly. Not like a good little casualty. No. If she had turned our wedding into a weapon, I'd turn our marriage into a trap. Not for vengeance. Though I won't lie, the thought of watching her lose everything brought me more comfort than I'd like to admit. But because I needed her to feel it. To understand what it meant to be stripped of control. To wake up and realize someone else had rewritten the ending. I began collecting pieces. A clause here. A loophole there. Buried contracts, confidential filings, names of shareholders she thought were loyal only to her. While she planned beach vacations and weekend brunches, I was mapping out the endgame. I wasn't broken. I was rebuilding. Quietly, carefully, like a man assembling a guillotine out of roses. They say betrayal feels like a knife in the back. But no, mine was quieter. It was like discovering your house has termites after you've already built a second floor. I didn't scream when I found the texts. I didn't break things when I saw the camera footage of Vanessa slipping into Elliot's black car the night of our wedding, still in her bridal dress. I just sat there, watching the screen replay her smile, her touch, her practiced laugh. That's when I stopped being a husband. And started being a strategist. The next morning, I brought her coffee. She smiled, kissed my cheek. "You always know what I need," she said. Yes, I did. She thought she had married a genius whose brilliance only extended to algorithms, patents, and data privacy. She forgot I grew up in foster homes where every adult was a different kind of manipulator, and I had to survive them all. She thought I lacked teeth. She didn't know I'd simply never been cornered before. I began where she thought I wouldn't look, her own company. Wolf Dynamics had been living on legacy reputation and PR glitter. But underneath that? Rot. They were propping up valuations through cooked quarterly projections and non-disclosed loans disguised as innovation grants. It only took a few well-timed favors and one quiet forensic accountant to expose everything. Then I targeted Elliot. He wasn't just her lover, he was her guard dog. His loyalty was physical, territorial. But I dug deeper into his military past and found an undisclosed discharge for misconduct involving missing equipment during a weapons training op in Syria. It had been buried. But nothing stays buried forever if you know where to look. With every discovery, I built a scaffold, not for revenge in the heat of rage, but for a reckoning so precise that even they would feel the elegance of it. Meanwhile, I made changes to my software company, quietly moving proprietary code into a shell firm registered under my mother's maiden name. When I rewrote our neural core in new architecture, I never merged it into Wolf's system. I let them think they had absorbed my IP through marriage. They hadn't. Because 6 months before the wedding, I added a clause to the prenup Vanessa skimmed past in her rush to protect herself. It stated that only assets integrated into Wolf's core code base, by me, would qualify for co-ownership. She never thought I'd outread her. But I did. Twice. In the final phase, I approached Wolf's rival, Miraxis Corp. They'd been circling for years. I offered them exactly what they needed, my software, a clean acquisition trail, and, most importantly, an inside look at Wolf's crumbling infrastructure. They agreed. I'd stay silent, sign off, and sell my marital holdings for a valuation Vanessa never imagined. I timed it all for the day after our 6-month anniversary. That night, she planned a private celebration. That same night, I filed for divorce. And scheduled the board meeting that would become her undoing. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about balance. She used love to build a trap. So I used marriage to build her mirror. And when she looked into it, I wanted her to see, not me, not Elliot, but the monster she became, smiling in her wedding dress, walking into another man's arms while I slept in the bed she vowed to never leave. That would be her real punishment. To live with the reflection. Have you ever watched a woman walk into a room and still have no idea who she really is? That's what it felt like watching Vanessa stroll into that boardroom, heels clicking, smile set to iconic, eyes flashing with cold confidence. To everyone else, she was the queen of Wolf dynamics. My wife. My partner. But to me, she was a carefully constructed house of glass, and today, I'd throw the first stone. I sat at the head of the conference table, the seat she usually claimed. That alone unsettled her. She blinked once. Paused. Adjusted her cufflinks like she needed the gesture to stay in control. Leon, she said, her tone clipped. What's this about? I tapped the folder in front of me. Thick. Heavy with receipts. Just some overdue transparency, I said. Everyone deserves to know the truth, don't you think? Her eyes darted to the board members, investors, advisors, legal reps, a few of them shifted in their seats, sensing blood in the water. One even uncapped a pen like he was preparing to sign someone's obituary. I opened the folder. First came the footage. Wedding night. 3:17 a.m. She didn't know I had the footage, not from our suite, but from the hallway. Wolf's own internal surveillance system. There she was, tiptoeing barefoot into the elevator. 30 minutes later, exiting on the security floor, where Elliot's private quarters were located. The room went silent. A few people turned away. One gasped softly, as if finally understanding the kind of woman she really was. Vanessa didn't speak. Her face cracked slightly, not in guilt. No. In panic. I wasn't done. While we're on the subject of transparency, I continued, flipping the page, I thought the board should also know about this. I slid out Elliot's personnel file. The real one. Not the sanitized version she had approved. Elliot Crane, dishonorably discharged from the military for conduct unbecoming. You falsified his background to bring him into the company's leadership structure. That's a felony. She reached for the file. I pulled it back. Oh, and this, I added, handing out copies to the board, a full analysis of the company's Q2 financials. You reported a 14% revenue increase. But the independent audit I commissioned shows a 7.3% decline. She opened her mouth, probably to say, that's absurd, but the CFO cut her off. We've never seen this report, he said carefully, scanning the data. You didn't, I said. Because she never filed it. She forged a report to maintain investor confidence. That's securities fraud. Vanessa stood. Leon, you're twisting. No, I said calmly. You twisted everything. You used our marriage to access my software. You planned to absorb it, divorce me, and walk away with joint rights. But you forgot to read the contract. Section 22, Clause D. I own every new patent developed post-marriage, shared across both companies. She stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. Leon, We can fix this. You can't fix a rot that deep. Her voice cracked then. You don't want to do this. I looked her straight in the eye. I already did. I turned to the board. I'm selling my full stake, along with every co-developed patent, to Novatech Systems. As of this morning, they own 51% of Wolf Dynamics product rights. The room exploded. Lawyers scrambled. Phones lit up. One of the board members cursed under his breath and stormed out. Vanessa dropped into her seat. Mouth open. Hands trembling. And still, I wasn't done. I'll give you one last thing, Vanessa, I said softly, almost kindly. The illusion of dignity. I won't tell the press about the wedding night. But when they ask me why I divested, I'll tell them it was for personal reasons. Her bottom lip quivered. Just slightly. She wasn't crying yet. But I think something inside her cracked, something more permanent than ego. She stood again. Slower this time. She didn't look at me when she left the room. I waited until the door closed behind her. Then I gathered my files, placed them back in the folder, and stood up. Someone clapped. I didn't look to see who. By the next morning, my name was no longer associated with Wolf Dynamics. By that afternoon, their stock dropped 28%. By week's end, Elliot's face had vanished from every security terminal and internal directory. Word was, he left the country. I didn't care. Vanessa tried to call. Once. Then she sent a letter. One word. Why? I never replied. Not because I didn't know the answer. But because some things aren't owed in words. She took love and twisted it into a chess move. She sacrificed loyalty for leverage. And she forgot the one rule people like her always forget. Quiet men build kingdoms in silence. And when they burn, no one sees the smoke until it's too late.